Our next speaker was a volunteer, a friendo of Lucy's, and we are immensely grateful to have Mark Schaefer. Please give a huge welcome to Mark Schaefer.
Okay. Hi, my name is Mark, and I'm a recovering mime. That's me in about 1980 or so. So the first thing you need to know is that I'm old. I've been here many times in the audience, and whenever I'm here, I feel like I'm the oldest person in the room. Apart from Minta's mom, is there anybody here over 60? No, nobody. Okay. So when I grew up in the 1960s, mime was a lot more mainstream than it is now. So if you went into any public park or public square, you would see a street mime in there doing their thing. Mimes were on TV in the 1960s. Marcel Marceau appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show several times. And the late 50s and early 60s was also the time when silent film was... Whoa, what happened here? Hello? There we go. The other thing you should know is I've never done this before. I have never done a talk with a slideshow in it. This is brand new to me. So in the late 50s and early 60s, that's when silent films were being rediscovered. They'd been largely forgotten until, when sound came in the late 20s. And suddenly there were these compilation films being made, taking all these silent film people out of context and putting in stupid narration and sound effects. But these are the things that we would see like at recess in school. When it was a rainy day, they would show us these old silent films. So being exposed to all these things and talking not being really my strong point, I kind of went toward these nonverbal ways of storytelling. And it just happened that I ended up going to probably the only high school in the universe that had its own mime troupe. It was called The World of Mime. And it was founded and directed by this guy, Bill Lawrence. He was a drama teacher in the school. Believe it or not, he just passed away a few months ago at the age of 95. But he's the one who taught us all rigorous mime technique. He used to cart us off to gigs in the back of his pickup truck. Back when a high school teacher could cart students around in the back of a pickup truck and nobody really cared. So naturally, when I graduated from high school, went off to college, I assumed I would just join the college mime troupe. And it turned out there was no college mime troupe. Who would have thought Princeton University would not have a mime troupe? So I started one, the Princeton Mime Company. I started out just by doing some solo shows just to kind of get interest up. And eventually enough people were interested that I started teaching mime workshops. And anybody who lasted a year in my mime workshop ended up being part of the Princeton Mime Company. So we ended up doing a show every spring. It was a big deal on campus. It was a big deal in the community. And when I graduated, the Princeton Mime Company kept going. It went on for like another 20 years, which I was very proud of. I even had students come to me and tell me that the reason they went to Princeton rather than to some other school is because there was a mime company at Princeton. So after I graduated, I naturally went on and performed in other places. I did solo shows. I teamed up with other people who had been in my mime workshop and did shows with them, including this guy. Anybody recognize him? No, that's Teller of Penn and Teller. So he and I did this silent mime and magic show together before he ever performed with Penn. And then later on, he and Penn Jillette were in my mime workshop. So, this went on for quite a few years. I probably in about 1984 is the last time I performed as a mime because adulthood got in the way. And this is kind of the first time I'm really coming back to it. So you may be wondering, where did all this mime stuff come from? There we go. Nobody really knows where mime started from because it's nonverbal, right? So we have We have scripts from ancient Greece, Sophocles, Aeschylus, but the stuff that wasn't said, we don't have any scripts for. So anybody who tells you that they know what was going on non-verbally back then, they're making it up. The one thing that I can tell you is we all know just from our own experience that nonverbal communication has always been with us, right? Anybody who's ever gone to a foreign country, you need to go to the bathroom and you don't know how to speak the language, you're still going to go, right? You're hungry, you don't know how to ask for food, you're still going to go. So nonverbal communication is something that we all kind of do instinctively. But if we want to look at where what we think of as mime now really started from, the place we have to go is, well, we've got to look at where mimes split off from clowns. So there I am, surrounded by a bunch of clowns. The first thing you need to know about mimes is that mimes hate being mixed up with clowns. Because as we all know, mimes are annoying, but clowns are creepy. So the only reason I'm here at all is because the Hyatt Regency was sponsoring this event for National Clown Day or something, and they invited me to come participate. And I said, no, I'm a mime, I'm not a clown. They said, we'll give you a free lunch. I was like, oh, okay. So, but the place where mimes and clowns both sort of started from is 16th century Italy with the Commedia dell'arte. And you've probably heard about a lot of these stock characters from the Commedia dell'arte. The ones that people are most familiar with are these three: Harlequin, Columbine, and Pierrot. Pierrot was the kind of lovesick clown who was in love with Columbine, but Columbine was much more interested in Harlequin. And these were characters and plots that everybody was familiar with. So when these troops appeared on the street and performed in these Commedia dell'arte roles, people were with them and knew who they were. Both mimes and clowns both descended from this character of Pierrot. And actually, this is an old out-of-focus picture of me as Pierrot in a college production. And you can see Pierrot is not a happy character. So this whole idea of these Commedia dell'arte characters kind of went on and spread to different countries, and different things happened in France and in England. So in France, we had this guy named Jean-Gaspard de Bureau, who is the one who took Pierrot and turned him from kind of a buffoon into somebody with emotion. Up until that time, silent acting had been something that was just kind of low comedy, a lot of pratfalls and stupid broad jokes. And de Bureau is the one who first gave him some humanity and turned him into the kind of sad, lovesick creature that we think of as Pierrot now. Meanwhile, in England, you had this guy, Joseph Grimaldi. Now, we have no pictures of him because he died in 1837 before there were photos. But he took Pierrot and turned him into what we think of now as a clown. And what he meant by a clown was not just, falling down in pratfalls. He brought personality, he brought character to his clown. And he became so well known for this that even now, people in the clown biz refer to themselves as Joeys, after Joseph Grimaldi. So Grimaldi you might think of as the first modern clown. If we're looking for the first modern mime, the person we want to look at is Etienne Decroux. Now, he lived a really long time. He lived through 1991, and he taught to the end of his life. So I actually know people who went to Paris and studied with Decroux while he was still around. For some reason, I have not found any pictures of Decroux with pants on. I don't know what the deal was with him. But what Decroux did is he took this kind of theatrical idea of mime that de Bureau had come up with, and he combined that with the discipline of dance. So dancers had a lot of these very formal techniques that made them look regal and formal on stage, and he brought that in and combined it with this idea of nonverbal theater. And so he's the one who came up with the idea of the mime as this lone figure on the stage, creating an entire universe around them. Until that time, that was brand new. And the idea of a mime being nobody and then suddenly becoming a character, this is something that, in a theater, if you're performing, the lights come up, there you are and you become whoever you're coming. If you're performing on the street, mimes have something called zero position, where you don't exist. And then you come out of zero position and you become whoever you become. So one of the big differences between mimes and clowns is that a mime can be anybody or anything. And a clown, as Grimaldi started showing, is a clown has a personality, a clown has a character. And you can see it in their costume, you can see it in their makeup, whereas mimes are kind of a blank slate and can be anyone. So Decroux was the one who kind of started the idea of mime that we think of now. He taught Jean-Louis Barrault, who was probably the most prominent mime of the mid-20th century. If you've never seen the film The Children of Paradise, 1945, go see it. It's in black and white, live with it. He just gives the most magnificent performance. I think he's just the greatest mime that we have any record of, Barrault. He taught Marcel Marceau, who you've probably heard of and probably have seen. There are some great stories about Marceau's life that I won't get into because we don't have time. But they carried on this tradition of Decroux. And, we have these two words, mime and pantomime, and nobody's really quite sure which is which. For a long time, they were kind of used synonymously. Once Decroux came along, the kind of mime that he invented, which he called corporeal mime, that's what we think of now as mime. And anything else besides that, we now call pantomime. So, pantomime will use props. Pantomime sometimes even uses speech. English pantomime is known for having spoken roles. If you're a fan of silent film, which I am, you know that all the early silent film actors were trained in pantomime. Pantomime is the art of telling stories non-verbally. There's not a lot of crossover between pantomime and what we think of as pure mime, but Buster Keaton is one of those people who crossed over. You can see him here, doing pantomime, but using a very classic mime technique to great effect. There you go. So mime at its best is this really powerful form of theater. Because it's so visual and so simple and so visceral, it bypasses all your logic centers and just goes like boom, right for the heart. Good mime can make you laugh, it can make you cry. And here again, Jean-Louis Barrault in The Children of Paradise does both beautifully. So since mime is such a beautiful, powerful thing, the question comes up, why do people hate mimes? Right? Because you hear people mention mimes and everybody says, oh yeah, mimes. Yeah. So I can tell you that there are probably two good reasons why people hate mimes. Here is the great Marcel Marceau doing some sort of routine on stage. What is he doing? I have no idea. Just because I'm a mime doesn't mean that I understand what other mimes are necessarily doing. I saw him on stage lots of times and he was wonderful, but sometimes I would say to myself, what the hell is going on? So this led to Woody Allen writing this famous essay from which this is probably the best known quote about seeing a mime performance. The mime now proceeded to spread a picnic blanket, and instantly my old confusion set in. He was either spreading a picnic blanket or milking a small goat. Next, he elaborately removed his shoes, except I'm not positive that they were his shoes because he drank one of them and mailed the other to Pittsburgh. So you can imagine if you are paying good money to see a mime show and then you have no idea what the mime is actually doing, that would be kind of annoying. So that's one reason why people may dislike mimes. The other one is there are really two different ways of performing mime. There's theatrical mime, which is what Marceau did, and there's street mime. Now, may have seen mimes on the street just doing their thing. I can tell you, as somebody who's done street mime, it's not just necessarily something that one does out of ego. Hey, look at me! Sometimes you're hired to do street mime. I was hired, like at fairs and events, to go out and entertain the crowd. And what you discover pretty quickly is the crowd may not want to be entertained. So one of the dilemmas that street mimes run into is that people may just want to be minding their own business and not have the mime come over and, be doing walls and ropes and things like that. So this is what gives mimes a bad name. And I think this is the reason why people kind of resent the idea of mimes these days. So if you want to go out and annoy people, what we're going to do now is show you some basic mime techniques and give you a chance to do some of them yourselves. Now, assisting me in this is my friend Minta Windsor, who I'd like to invite up. Minta is actually somebody who I used to work with at Chabot College, and we both discovered that we had this secret shared past. But this is actually the first time we're like doing any mime stuff together. So we're going to show you 3 different mime techniques, and I'm going to stay up here, and Minta is actually going to go down into the audience and help you guys do these things. The first mime technique that I want to show you is something called the isolation. And this is something that came out of dance, actually. And isolation means separating one part of your body from another. So, for example, you could do a head isolation, right? Where your head is staying still and your body moves. Right? Now, I realize that you don't have a lot of room to move around, but here's something you can do where you're seated. And that is, try isolating your hand. Put your hand out, and imagine that your hand is now resting on something. And see where you can move your body without your hand going anywhere. Right, you can stand up if you want, and you can move down, you can move up, and see how far you can go without your hand moving. So that's an isolation, and that's a very important part of constructing a physical world around yourself. What you want to combine that with is something called the talk. Now, normally when we move around, we tend to move really fluidly, right? But if you're constructing a physical world around you, you want to have your motions be able to end really suddenly. So like if you're doing a mime wall, which we've all seen, it's not just a matter of having your hand go out into space. You want your hand to have its motion end really abruptly. That's a talk. So there we go. So when you combine a talk with an isolation, which is what Minta was just doing, then you get that illusion of a wall. Yay! So again, this is not something that you can easily do where you're seated, but one way that the talk has sort of come into popular culture that you might want to try doing is that old hip-hop robot dance. That's all talks, right? That's, steady movement with really clear, abrupt endings. There you go. Okay, one last technique that I want to share with you is filling in lines and planes. So what we've done so far just gives you a sense of you're making physical contact with a particular surface. But we want to give the impression that there's this entire surface still there. So, for example, if I'm doing the old mime thing of leaning on a mantle, right? You don't want to just do this, because that doesn't really show you anything. You want to have your arm flat, and there's an isolation where you can isolate your hand. You want to have your arm flat so that they can see the surface that you're resting on. If you're opening a door, you don't just want to do that, right? Because then you just see a doorknob, you don't really see the door. So what you want to do is have one arm on the door, have the other on the doorknob, open it that way, and then you see the door. If you're doing this wall illusion that we were doing before, and I think Minta was doing this a moment ago, you don't just want to go along this way, you want to, right? And now you see the rest of the surface. By the way, Minta still has her mime chops much more than I do, so she's just doing beautiful stuff here. So let's put this all together and do the famous mime rope pull, because this puts all three of those techniques together. First thing is, if you're pulling a rope, you don't want to pull it this way toward you, because then it looks like it's going through your stomach. So you do it crosswise, across the front of your body. And you want to have your thumbs along the line of the rope, because you want to see that continuous line. And you want to isolate your body so that when you pull the rope, okay, now right now, this rope is just unreeling from like a spool on the other side of the room, right? There's no tension on it. But once you start putting tension on the rope, then you start getting all these nice body isolations, right? So, I haven't seen any of your time signals. Are we okay on time? Okay. Minta, have you seen anybody out in the audience who you think might be good enough to bring up on stage? Okay, so let's say you and I have a tug of war. All right, so let's pick up the rope. All right, and I'm going to follow you. So you give a tug. Okay, I'm going to pull back. And you pull back. There we go. And I'm going to really cheat. Let me pull back this way. And oh, wow, okay. All right, good, thank you. Anybody else want to come up and try something? No, all right. So, does anybody have questions? Yes?
In kind of your history timeline, it seemed like everyone was French. Why?
Yeah, okay, so in looking at the history timeline, why was everyone French? And for that matter, one thing you didn't ask, but one thing that bothered me, why are they all men? So, I can't do anything about the actual facts of history. The first female mime that really became well known was Lorene Yarnell, who teamed up with Robert Shields. And she wasn't even trained as a mime, she was trained as a dancer. For some reason, that evolution of mime took place in France. I mean, Decroux was French, and the people that he taught tended to be French, and that's just the way it happened. I don't have any control over how the history worked out. Yeah.
So if people hate mimes and people are paying you to entertain, why would they pay for things that people hate?
Great question, because this was back in the 70s and 80s. Back then, mime hatred had not yet become a kind of universal feeling, and there were still people who enjoyed watching us and interacting with us. Any questions up in the balcony? Yes?
Why do you have that specific face paint?
Okay, good question. Why do we have that white face paint? That all starts from that Pierrot figure from Commedia dell'arte. These other characters in Commedia dell'arte tended to wear masks. If you think of Harlequin always has a mask, right? Pierrot was never shown masked. Pierrot just always had that white makeup. And both Grimaldi and de Bureau, who did these different outgrowths of Pierrot, both retained that white makeup. So in one sense, it's just traditional, and in another, it really helps you be able to see people's facial expressions from far away. And when you're performing on the street, mime was originally a street art that really helps portray a character. Yes?
Does miming mean not speaking or not making any noise?
Traditionally, it means not speaking. There are times when mimes will make noise. For example, if you're knocking on a door, it's very common for a mime to go. So you can sort of make your own sound effects, but there aren't that many opportunities to do that, and for the most part, mime is both nonverbal and silent. Yes.
What's your favorite silent film?
My favorite silent film of all the silent films? Oh my God. I guess if I had to choose one, and if you ask me tomorrow, I would say something else. F.W. Murnau made a film called Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans. If you've never seen a silent drama, that's the one to go start with. It is just absolutely beautiful. It's called Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans. And the director is F.W. Murnau, M-U-R-N-E-U. One more question. Oh, yes.
How big is the mime community today, and is there any sort of governing body?
So far as I know, there has never been any governing body for mime. People often ask me, how do you become a mime? Do you go to mime school and get a certification or something? And no, you become a mime by going out and performing mime. The mime community today is really small. Hopefully, it will come back. But for now, it's kind of in its dormancy. Okay? Thank you.